Now, if the biggest internet company and the biggest surveillance agency work together, do you think that we, the public, have a right to know? Well, so far, the courts do not. On Friday, a federal appeals court upheld the NSA's decision to withhold documents confirming or denying any relationship that it has with Google. And the saga all started after a cyber attack on Google in January of 2010, in which Gmail accounts of human rights activists in China were targeted. And at that point, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, they reported that Google had admitted that it turned to U.S. authorities to help build up their defenses. There was even an op-ed in the Post at that time from former NSA chief Mike McConnell. And he said that a collaboration between Google and the NSA was, quote, inevitable. So all of that led the Electronic Privacy Information Center to file a FOIA request, which the NSA tried to shut down by handing them a GLOMAR response. Now, a GLOMAR response, well, it's based on a historic case, but basically what it is, it's a refusal to either confirm or deny the existence of the records that the FOIA request was seeking. As you can imagine, this thing is a favorite amongst government agencies. So what happened next was Epic responded by filing a lawsuit using the reports in the Post to say that the existence of this partnership had already been confirmed. But the court didn't buy it. And on Friday, the appeal by Epic was also shut down. And the court even said that the NSA could simply not respond to this request because even a rejection could reveal certain details that the NSA claims are national security secrets. This was what was written in the ruling. It said that if the NSA disclosed whether there are or are not records of a partnership or communications between Google and NSA regarding Google's security, that disclosure might reveal whether NSA investigated the threat, deemed the threat a concern to the security of U.S. government information systems, or took any measures in response to the threat. As such, any information pertaining to the relationship between Google and NSA would reveal protected information about NSA's implementation of its information assurance mission. So like I said, this has turned into quite the saga, but it's worth seeing how the process works to understand the many ways in which government agencies fight transparency by invoking national security and how the courts respond. So now that you're enlightened on why we're being kept in the dark, let's get into why this matters. Joining me to discuss is Trevor Timm, activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Trevor, thanks for joining us tonight. And basically what I want to do is I think that some people out there, I'm going to play devil's advocate, would say that who cares? If Google has a security problem, why wouldn't they turn to the NSA and have them help them fix it? They're the biggest internet company in the world. But why should we know about this?
Well, I think it goes back to the history of the NSA over the last decade and how they've actually been working way more extensively with telecommunications providers and internet service providers than we ever knew. I mean, the most famous example is the NSA's warrantless wiretapping program, which was running for years before we found out about it in 2005, where the NSA was basically siphoning off huge masses of Americans' emails and telephone records. And at the time, the telecom companies denied even involvement, but eventually they started to admit it. And this all culminated with the passage of a huge immunity bill in Congress in 2008, which allowed these companies to escape prosecution or lawsuits because they were handing over this information to the NSA. So Google is the next step in this, and obviously there's no evidence that they're doing anything malicious, but we should at least be able to know the extent of their relationship with the NSA to make sure they're not handing anything over inappropriately like has been going on for so many years.
And so in that sense, what do you think of the way that the courts react? And this happens very often. This is definitely not the only case where they hear national security and they say, okay.
Exactly. Unfortunately, the courts have been a little too deferential to the national security claim that the government makes pretty much in all these cases these days. Same thing goes with our NSA suit with the warrantless wiretapping program. They use the state secrets privilege in that suit, claiming that they can't, well, even if the allegations are true, that they don't have to fight them in court because it's a state secret, it's national security. Actually, the ACLU just complained about the GLOMAR response in another case about drones in the New York Times the other day, saying that essentially what you were saying in the opening, that this has been reported by major news outlets, it's common knowledge, everybody admits it, but in court for some reason we're not allowed to talk about it. So the GLOMAR response has become kind of the shield that the government uses to prevent any sort of release of information that could potentially pertain to national security, and it's really caused secrecy to explode.
And the thing is, it's not just Google and the NSA, right? At the moment, we see a lot of cybersecurity bills that are working their way through Congress. You and I have spoken about CISPA, some of the ones working their way through the Senate. But does it kind of give you an idea that, let's say, if CISPA passes, then we're not going to have a whole lot of transparency, a lot of accountability when it comes to just how much information private companies are going to be sharing with government agencies?
Yeah, CISPA's tough in two directions, because first, it gives pretty much full immunity to companies to hand over as much information as it wants, as long as it can claim cybersecurity purposes. And even if it's on the fence, the immunity is so broad that it would be almost impossible for users to prove anything in court. And the same goes for the other side in the government. The bill's authors claim that, oh, well, you can sue the government. We give that cause of action in the bill. But again, they can just raise national security like they have in all these other cases to essentially stamp down suits. And we've been suing the NSA for 6 years now, and the case isn't even close to over. So you can imagine if individual users tried to sue the government over misuse of their cybersecurity information. It's just an endless rabbit hole.
And then what about what we're hearing now, which is that the Pentagon had a pilot program that they have just recently decided is going to be permanent, where it was private defense companies were sharing information with the government. And the White House said, go ahead and make it permanent, which is interesting because the White House has come out against CISPA because they're supposedly concerned about privacy concerns. And so it becomes this whole tangled mess. But it pretty much sounds like, and maybe you can go into more detail for the audience here, like we don't even need any of these bills to be passed because they're doing it anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. This program was expanded to over 1,000 companies. It was just announced the other day. And they involve defense contractors, but they also apparently involve internet service providers. And at least in this program, the information is only going one way. So the government's giving them classified information. And we don't have necessarily a problem with that, but it does raise the question of why this bill is needed in the first place. There's actually another program going on within the FBI that was reported by Forbes about a month ago. I think actually we talked about it on the show before, where actually companies are handing information to a nonprofit who is then handing it to the government. Now, in this situation is where the privacy concerns really come out, because it's the company handing over personal information. And in the nonprofit's case, they actually anonymize the data and take out names and addresses before handing it over to the government. Far more privacy protections than are allowed under CISPA. CISPA just destroys that and says the government can get basically the contents, your identity, everything when it's handed over to the companies. So it's really a question of both ways why this bill is even needed if they're doing it already.
Oh, that's just lovely. But I wonder if, everything that we're hearing when it comes to drumming up the cyber war threat out there is actually working. Let me just throw a quick study out there at you. And this comes from Unisys. They did a phone survey. They asked Americans how important it was for a candidate to emphasize certain issues in the upcoming election. 74% said protecting government computer systems against hackers and criminals. 73% protecting our electric power grid. Only 68% said homeland security issues like terrorism. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, this has been a campaign going on in Congress for a couple months now. They actually just had a hearing on the Homeland Security Committee where they had five experts come up and use the scariest language possible to describe cyber Armageddon, cyber Pearl Harbors, and this is the next big threat to American national security or anybody's personal information. Unfortunately, they don't really have a lot of evidence to back this up. There was a story in the New York Times just a couple weeks ago talking about the cyber crime wave that wasn't. Foreign Policy has published similar articles explaining that this is being way overblown. And the funny thing is, even if cybersecurity is a problem, which obviously we've seen, or at least it's been alleged that Chinese hackers have gotten into a lot of Fortune 500 companies, this whole information sharing business that they have going on with CISPA just shows that they aren't even attacking the problem. They're just trying to lower our privacy laws so information can go back quicker, but it does nothing to really strengthen the networks of the governments or these companies. So it's really a wonder for a lot of reasons why this bill is needed and why they're going the direction that they are.
But apparently somehow they're influencing public opinion with it. Trevor, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot.